Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this event, which is being organised by the university, the Montfort University in Leicester, as part of our Living in a Digital Society research theme, one of our 5 key themes in the university, of which I am the director. My name is Gabriel Egan, and we thought for this event that we'd like to do something to mark the United Nations World Telecommunications Day, 17th of May, with a discussion amongst experts from the university and outside the university of the good and bad side of social media. We often hear of stories of terrible consequences of social media, and I'm sure many people have reservations, certainly about some aspects of what large technology companies are doing, and perhaps the sociological effects of children in particular carrying around supercomputers connected to lots of other people. It's definitely a hot topic for discussion. We don't often hear, although we all know, I think, of positive sides of social media. I don't think we often hear from experts talking about the research into positive aspects of social media. So we've put together this roundtable discussion today of 3 talks by experts from the university and outside on this topic. So what we want to do is speak about it for about up to an hour of papers from our speakers, and then I want to open it up for a wide-ranging discussion of the points raised by our speakers. So I'm going to introduce them individually before their particular paper. And I'm going to ask everybody, please do keep to 20 minutes or just under for your talk. So we have up to half an hour for discussion at the end of it, around about 1 o'clock. Beg your pardon, right about 1:30. So I'm going to invite our first speaker, Indrani Lahiri, to join us. Indrani is Senior Lecturer in Media and Communication, and her research focuses on digital media, society and politics. She looks at pressing questions in contemporary media studies, digital society, socio-political concerns, communication, public relations, diversity, inclusion, race, media culture, media effects and media technologies, bringing in ideas about where we're going with big data, post-colonialism, globalization, political economy and social development policies. So I hope you can see she's right there in this debate about the sociology of these social media. And the talk she's going to give today is Digital Society and Resilience. So over to you, Indrani.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. A very warm welcome to everyone who is with us today, listening. So my talk is going to be I'm going to talk about the digital society and resilience. And of course, the talk is based on some of the projects that I have been doing. So I will start with actually a question, and it would be good to receive some comments from those who are listening. So the question is really, do we need to celebrate international days? And that's one of the things that we have come across time and again. I thought that this is going to be a good question to start with. But as mentioned on the UN website, if you go on to that, you will see that they say that these occasions, that they are, these individual days that we are celebrating, they actually help us to educate the public on issues of concern, to mobilize political will and resources to address global problems, and to celebrate and reinforce achievements of humanity. Now, today, of course, as Gabriel introduced, we are celebrating the World Telecommunications and Information Society Day to discuss the good and bad of living in a digital society. And myself, my interest is very much into digital media and society. And as a digital anthropologist, I am keen to understand how we as humans, we work, talk, live, chat, eat, sleep, etc. in a digital world. Are there any differences? Is there something from this digital world that actually can empower us, that can actually enhance our capacities? So as you can see in this first slide, what I've done is I've tried to put in a network of keywords, and I call them network of keywords as they can work together, but they have got the potential to work in isolation as well. And it is very much like we do live offline and online lives, you know. Now, these keywords are based on two fundamental principles, as you can see through the keywords. And those principles are principles of observation and principles of processing. That is at the heart of digital anthropology. Now, to make it simple, it is like actually driving a car and observing the hazards, then to process that information to avoid any potential damage caused. The only difference between the two is the social understanding of immediacy. Now, in the case of the car, you are socially trained and accepted to wait. But on social media, moments gone are moments lost, which is broadly defined as FOMO, which is fear of missing out. And that's a trap, actually. And I'm not going to go much into that trap, so I'm not taking that route today. Rather, I'm sharing some of my experiences of how, through research, I've managed to navigate through that immediacy and turned it to work in advantage of research. So, going back to the keywords, they are not just words, but they are mental processes. So, how we are receiving, processing, and taking actions depends on how we have observed and processed an information online. For example, if I'm checking social media every 5 minutes, I see chaos, noise, etc. But when I choose to go into a network that I have joined to find information, say, for example, a network where academics are coming to kind of share their research and talk about the research and talk about potential collaborations, or a network that I have joined based on photography because I've got particular interest in that, I see value there. And I find a community of interest. I find my friends. I enhance my knowledge. I learn from them. And in some ways, that also helps me to, join the activism that's happening online. Now, this is because the first one is a social choice. So I get a deluge of information through the social media and I keep browsing it every 5 minutes. Therefore, I'm exposed more. However, the later, which I have joined the network because I want to gain something from there, is my choice and it's based on my principles. My principles, again, is driven by the research that I'm doing. So the choice that I'm talking about here fundamentally is actually informed by literacy. Now, what we talk about is, these days is very much around media literacy and talking about how media literacy can actually help us understand the content that we see in the media. Similarly, there is this digital literacy, which is basically very important when we are operating on digital platforms. If we don't understand the purpose of that platform, then we will be giving out our time for nothing. So, say for example, you are browsing, and at the end of the day, your phone says to you that you had about 5 hours of screen time. That means 5 hours you have lost from your day just through browsing through the content. And that's actually unstructured content that does not have a value that you are actually otherwise looking for through your research. So understanding that, fundamentally we call it digital literacy. And if you understand that how these platforms work, how you should work, how you should engage, I think there is also a cue for you to understand there about how you can use those platforms to build your resilience. So say, for example, thought interactions, talking to people who are in similar kind of situations or who are navigating through similar challenges that you are facing can actually empower you, which I think are powerful skills in a digital society. And I have been working on several projects, but would like to share two specific projects here that has actually helped me to build the social capacity and both of them have an ongoing impact. in the society. So the first one is the community resilience. Now, in 2020, of course, the research didn't start in 2020. In 2019, I was working on a project to understand how migration is framed and in the media, and how that migration impacts the school education system. So while I was doing that, of course, we then faced this crisis. And in 2020, amidst the crisis, we formed a community of interest who I came to know through online and offline. They're both online and offline contacts. It's a mix of that. And the purpose of that community of interest was to navigate through the crisis and build resilience using digital platforms. One of them is called Children's Stories in Times of Corona, which is now rebranded as Building Resilience in Children, or BRIC in short, and it has received a high funding as well. But it actually initially started with a discussion of working from home, homeschooling, and challenges that working moms were facing at that point of time, because all of a sudden their space has been taken away. And if I go back to the keywords that I started with, all of these started as a network of thoughts. So we started sharing thoughts, we started sharing our challenges, we started talking about those. That then led us to build a network of actions. So we took particular actions based on those thoughts that we had. And currently we are working with the partners and collaborators who comes with varied experiences and expertise, and some of them are local, some of them national, even international partners. So in the same year, we also, after starting the Children's Stories in Corona and actually starting to build that capacity, we then looked into some of the Parliament documents, and we saw that there is a South Asian Heritage Month that is in July. And in 2020, in the same year, we started to collaborate with different art organizations, charities, to start the Manavutsav, which means human festival, to celebrate the South Asian Heritage Month. Now, the Manavutsav is broadly a platform where we bring in different charities and different businesses to work together and to think about creative practices and how that can help build community resilience rather than medicalizing things. So an alternative form that we are kind of exploring. I won't say that we have created all the tools, but yes, gradually we are getting there. Now, this year we will be running the events for the third year, and fundamentally, the Manavutsav, which started by looking into creative arts and performances, is now going to talk about and look into building community resiliences through sustainable living. So, as I said, that Manavutsav is based on creative arts and performances. And this year, we also have a PhD student who will be working on the project, particularly exploring the pathways to build community resilience through creative arts, media, and music. What we found was that from previous literatures that there is a gap in longitudinal studies, in collecting data from how basically this works and whether it works at all or not. And what is the difference between offline and online practices? And that's what we are going to also test out this Manavutsav. And Manavutsav is a social innovation project that broadened the scope of this interdisciplinary research, so we can look into and talk to other disciplines and learn from them. And this year, of course, the theme is sustainable community, but we still work on the creative practices. So that brings us to talk about the next one. So how does this community resilience then lead to community actions? And as I was saying, that it had a long impact that we have now started to see. Now, both of these projects have contributed towards developing community actions, like workshops using creative methods to expand mental capacities. So we have been doing these during teaching festivals at DMU, but we have been also experimenting with these practices through community centers, through individuals, online, but we haven't actually done a comparative study between the two, which we are aiming to do this time. The other things that we have also done is we have been working locally with community centers to understand the challenges and develop solutions. And learning from those challenges from the community, what we have also planned for this year is that we will be delivering workshops on how to use digital platforms to stay connected, particularly for older person as a part of healthy aging. And again, that's something that we will be running for the first time. However, that's something that has come directly from the community through the interactions and workshops that we had previously. We will run these digital creative workshops during Manavotsav to understand how digital platforms can facilitate the conversation and if they have an impact on mental well-being at all, and what we can learn from them. So from there, certainly, after taking the community actions, what we are also trying to map is that, is there something that's actually empowering the community? And the answer is yes, because all of these actions that we have taken have led towards community empowerment. Last week, we had a conversation around starting a community radio station at a community center, particularly for people to share network in languages other than English. Because during that discussion, what came up was that particularly the community has faced problem while accessing the information from NHS sites, and they want something in their language so that they can communicate, and they want befriending sessions and all of that. That led to this discussion of community radio, which we are looking at the moment. As they have also found that this is something that is quite new to their generation, and they want to learn more about digital practices and how all of these digital platforms work. And one of the things that was also highlighted during that time was that the Zoom interactions actually worked really well for them. So everything, all the discussions that happened during that time actually link back to the loneliness and how we can we can have different events or workshops that can help them to come together and do something new. And the community radio is one of the things that we have discussed in that workshop. There are also people who have started their TikTok for their business, and we have been discussing this, how you promote your business. TikTok is not just about doing catchy videos, but it's also about how you can develop your business, or you can use that platform to educate the public or to network. And we have had people who have found their niche market, so they had to start their business, so they have understood what their expertise are in and how they can actually develop that further. We have seen charities develop and take new pathways and do events. And one of the live events that we have done here also was to celebrate the World Happiness Day in Leicester, and which happened for the first time actually this year. So on that note, I would like to conclude with my final slide, which is basically what I have discussed particularly today is it's basically around digital literacy. So digital literacy can lead towards digital resilience. So how much time you're giving on the platform, what kinds of information you're processing, how much time you spend processing those informations online. It all goes back to actually understanding digital platforms. And I believe that there is a lot on the digital platforms that can help us to stay together, work together, and celebrate the things that we have together as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Indrani. That's wonderful. I'm looking forward to the debate about the points you raised there. I've got questions of my own, and I'm sure I'll have questions from the floor as well. Excuse me. Thank you. Our second speaker is Giuliana Tiripelli, who is Senior Lecturer in digital journalism and media discourse at the Montfort University, and her research examines the role of the media in social change processes, focusing on news media, digital media, normative models of journalism, and strategic communication for social change. Her work aims to contribute to the analysis and reform of media's role in shaping discourses and practices during periods of social transformation and instability. And the title of the talk she's going to give us is Social Media and the Information Society in the New Millennium, Global Approaches to the Constructive Potential of Digital Networks in the Crisis Age. Over to you, Giuliana.
Thank you, Gabriel, for your very kind and comprehensive introduction. Yes, this is going to be a bit of a big talk. It's going to be different from the one that Indrani just provided and the one that will follow. I'm going to be talking more about general aspects and concepts, and in particular, the global aspect, the general aspect of the information society. And I'll also bring some empirical evidence from my recent policy-related research. However, this is going to be a classic, traditional, theoretical talk with no slides as well. So in this talk, I want to use some concepts which are contained in research about the information society and networked communities to point towards, as Gabriel was also anticipating, approaches to digital interaction that can support communities during times of crisis. This is very important in my research, the sociology of journalism and sociology in general, critical analysis of media discourses. I always try to have that so-called positive aspect or angle in my research. That's very important. I want to start with the beginning. One of the most important scholars of the information society that many may know is Manuel Castells, who is considered one of the most renowned theorists of information society in general. I think it's good sometimes to root what we are saying and doing, especially when we do something very practical, local, very grounded. Never forget the importance of the big ideas and the theories. Castell published, as you may know, and some of you may know, or you may know, the famous trilogy at the end of the 90s, The Information Age, composed by 3 different books, The Rise of the Network Society, The Power of Identity, and the third book, The End of Millennium. Then they have been revised and edited and published again later on. But anyway, they were the first version of the so-called theory of this network society at a time when the web was very young. The web was invented at the beginning, the end of the 80s, early 90s by Berners-Lee, but we still didn't have the social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, as we know them today. So it was pretty an advanced kind of theory. I think it's very useful then in this special day to use it to revise our ideas about social media, good and bad. Because Castells provides us with imaginative concepts that can be used to think about this beyond academia themselves. So I want to focus on 2 points that then will help me to go through my empirical evidence and my final 2 critical points for the conclusion. And the first one is the idea of the information age. What is that Castell says about the information age? The information age is an age based on informationalism. Informationalism means that we are living in a specific form of social organization in which information generation, management, processing, transmission become the fundamental sources of productivity and power. And so in there you have this idea of a quantity, first of all, more information everywhere. We're having a talk today, we meet people, everything is done online, more information to do things at the moment. And this because Castell was saying this push in the technological developments at the end of the 90s. But there is also a focus on quality in his theory, and which is explained in this concept of the network logic. The network logic is the logic within this information age or network society that we still live in today. Now, on one hand, we can understand it as the view that we are all connected, that information flows through networks. Networks are a key term in my speech, or even that much of what we did before with our hands and bodies, by going physically to a place, by doing physical things, are now replaced by informational approaches and behaviors. And we can think just of a very basic example of how we shop for food today. Many of us don't go to the shop anymore, don't use their hands, their cars, their legs, their voices. They use information. You switch on your laptop and you order your food. So that's a qualitative kind of change in terms of the information society. But more deeply, and as a sociology, I want to emphasize that this change that we live in is a change in which the whole of society, also and especially its invisible parts, those that sociologists study, are part of technological media dynamics. How we understand behaviors, how we create judgment about things, and what we consider to be a friend today, and so on. So, according to Castells, all these allow the formation of new forms of social organization and social interactions along electronically based information networks. Another very relevant point in Castells, after having spoken about the network logic, is the idea of the people. Who are the people involved in the information society? And Castells uses a term which was related to an idea or a concept that other sociologists also used around that time, before and after. He called one group of the people involved in the network society, those that he said would thrive in this society, he called them the knowledge workers. Other sociologists call them the symbolic analysts, but it means more or less the same. Castell and his colleagues and their colleagues, what they meant was all the people that have effective skills of communication, effective skills for analysis and critical analysis, skills for abstract thinking, all these agents who could manage information and be at the center of the dynamics of shaping, processing information in this informational age would thrive in the informational society. Their presence in society, I think, is very important because symbolic analysts tend to not occupy the same positions in a solid corporate bureaucracy, but are capable of moving around or organizing their life project, organizing not only their career, but making choices that other people may not be able to do. And this has important qualitative repercussions. First of all, on the ability of the society to progress. So there is a qualitative change in there as well. Society is able to progress more, but also better because you have this kind of people. But at the same time, there is also a qualitative effect on how communities are formed and kept together. If you have a lot of people or a part of the population, and a very important part that deals with this, is able to move around and to create new ideas and behave in different ways, you are also creating, in a way, a fracture in society. And division can be also caused by the culture that these knowledge workers create. Usually, knowledge workers, cosmopolitan people, tend to develop cultural appropriation and other unrooted cultures. I would call them unrooted form of cultures with no strict or strong geographical roots, while those staying behind have to grab any residual identification, cultural elements to rebuild their identities, or they need to reify the good old days in order to have some residual kind of identities. And I think this is very important to consider and inspired by the theory by Castell. And now what happens after Castell? And I want to use this to get then to today and current times and my reflection and analysis of current times. After Castell's, there was the rise of the social media as we know them today. And this was at the same time as the social media, Twitter, Facebook, were being created and started to be used. We had a rise in a kind of optimistic literature, optimistic theories about the social media that saw that the social media as liberatory, allowing a freedom that was not there before. So even more optimistic than Castell themselves. I want to just make two examples in my speech. One is the contribution by Jenkins. Jenkins in 2006 wrote a book entitled Convergence Cultures, Where Old and New Media Collide. And this was, he created the theory of convergence. And this theory was related to the fact that digital lay users, normal people like us, anyone, now we're going to contribute directly to the informationalism processes. Convergence was defined as the flow of content across multiple media platforms, the cooperation between multiple media industries, and the migratory behavior of media audiences that were going all over the place online to find the content they wanted, to shape the content they wanted, to process the content that they wanted. And according to Jenkins, this was a so-called positive cultural shift because it was creating a sort of a collective intelligence. So it was bringing society to a better level, to an improved kind of level from a qualitative perspective. In a similar way, another digital sociologist, let's call it him in this way, Brands in 2008 spoke of produce age. He wrote a book called Blogs, Wikipedia, Second Life and Beyond, where he coined this term of produce age. And by the term produce age, he meant the collaborative and continuous building and extending of existing content in pursuit of further improvement. He, in other words, was saying that platforms such as Wikipedia were allowing people to participate in an open way, so open participation, to evaluate in a communal way, so communal evaluation, that there was no hierarchy anymore about the knowledge and knowledge production. There was an ad hoc meritocracy, and also, very important, that the knowledge that was produced was always unfinished and could be improved in terms of quality over and over and over again. All this, again, was considered to be positive, or to be bringing something positive to society in general. And there is here this idea that the idea behind this kind of theories is the idea that by themselves, the network of the information age can produce something positive, like a sort of an invisible hand. And this was followed also in the general culture and the policies of the time by all the many different policies and documents that many local council, national institutions, and also international ones used when you will find a lot of the word smart. Everything was smart at the time. There were policies about the smart societies, policies about the smart house, smart everything. So automatically, because we were using digital interactive telecommunications, we were assuming that things were becoming smarter. Now, Indrani has already highlighted some of the reasons for which this cannot be the case, but let me bring you my own views from my own research. Now, 15 years have passed. We have had 15 years of social media experience, and in general, there is the idea that we can be much less optimistic about their role in society. And the questions that we can ask are, how has the network society evolved? Where can we apply some of the old optimism in our study of digitally interactive societies? Are we living with good or bad social media? These are obviously very big questions to answer, but one can only answer them, and it's possible to answer them if you contextualize. As I always say to my students, when you use terms such as positive and negative, you can only answer if you specify the context, because these are polysemic terms which have many different meanings. So I will bring you my own research to answer to these questions and finish my talk. I've recently tackled this topic in my policy report entitled The Role of the Media in Crisis Situation. This is a report which I've been writing for the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And I was commissioned to do this by the Council of Europe, by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe last year. In this report, I discuss some of the issues to focus on the roles of the media to support societies in transition. And I also tried to give to the member states of the Council of Europe some ideas about practical, constructive ways in which the digital media could be approached by the international institutions and the member states to support communities during time of crisis, such as, for example, during a pandemic, during European involving wars, and so on. This report is available in the Montfort database called DORA, and is open access, is available in Italian and in English if you want to read it. So from that angle, from that research, it is difficult to support some of the arguments about the information age, visions, and promises. First of all, it is difficult for me to support the idea that the information society automatically performs effectively and more effectively than the previous ones in terms of quantities. We always have to look at whose quantities when we talk about quantities, and we say that something is better because there is more. Who has this more? So it seems that is not the case, at least in situation of crisis, as everyone can see. When we have a crisis, we have really a lot of information. We live in an hyper informative world, and that does not guarantee quality of social life as well. So quality, we can easily say, does not really work by itself. But it's also difficult to support the idea that effectiveness is achieved due to the transformation of the media and telecommunication. So quality as well, quality of information alone does not do the work. I have an example about this. But in general, I can say that most effective approaches in my research were those dominated by a sense of community, while solutions focusing on improving information processing and led by institutions or by citizens were only able to offer little progress in crisis situation, not so much. Something else was needed, and not just improved quality of information or information processing. And it's obviously, you will agree with me, difficult to support the idea that we live in an age where collective processes of knowledge creation by digital users bring more democracy, participatory practices, and collective intelligence. So I won't try to bring evidence for that, because I think we can automatically agree with that. So 2 examples from my research, from my report for the Council of Europe, and I want to discuss 1 negative and 1 positive, and then conclude my talk. The negative example comes from my analysis of a very important, very professional journalistic report in the form of a video documentary, which was posted on YouTube. This is a documentary produced by the program Report. Is it in an Italian program? And it goes on Italian TV regularly, and is very is known to be excellent journalistic work. So the team working for Report did a documentary about the production of the COVID vaccine in January 2021. And in this documentary, they were explaining the complex process of testing and producing vaccines. And this episode was based on an excellent journalistic approach to investigation. It offered the audiences hypotheses for interpreting the unfolding process in critical ways. So it was very informative and very critical. You could have a comprehensive understanding of the tensions, the problems, but also the successes of the research, of the expert of vaccines, the institutions involved, the funding, the dark side, and the good side of it. This documentary was produced by the Italian TV RAI and then posted on YouTube. And I analyzed the comments on YouTube. And I could see that in the lonely digital environment, during that situation which was marked by uncertainty and a lot of fear, the individuals who were commenting and engaging with that were not really using the comment space to deliberate about this content, which was super top high quality content, nor to deliver any collective intelligence. Rather, they converge towards very simplistic interpretations. For example, ideas such as and these were ideas across the whole corpus of comments. And I'm not just cherry picking. So ideas such as the fact that there is an undefined elite, very powerful elite, including all politicians and big business, the them versus us, the vulnerable ones in society, or ideas such as the dominance of elite interest and profits in all political decisions about the vaccine and everything else, about ideas about the presence of alternative cures, drugs, and possibilities to be healed about COVID, which, however, were not discussed in the media because they were not profitable. This example shows that digital users in this case were taking pinches of critical thinking and using these for an exercise in asserting simplistic views and oppositional views. However, they didn't even realize that the documentary was saying something else, and actually the opposite of what they were believing. They believed that the documentary was supporting their own simplistic explanations. This is what can happen with quality, excellent investigative information when obviously there is another kind of problem. So people frantically search for confirmation about their views. They are hungry for establishing a truth of some kind, whatever that is, that they can comprehend in a holistic manner, and they will always accept and deal and produce what they can comprehend. And that's the main need behind the society network and the social media. So if the problem is not just quality, is it media literacy and communication education? Not really, or not just that. And I have a positive example, my last example in my talk. And this comes from the analysis of the so-called COVID-19 mutual aid Facebook groups, which were started by citizens and spontaneously at the beginning of the lockdown. I studied one in particular from a famous English town, not London, another town. And in there, the group was born spontaneously and grew quickly in a few days under the pressure of residents who had so many questions. And at the moment where the council was still not able to come in and kind of fill those gaps and respond to those needs, because the institutions are always and have to be a bit slower, they have to reorganize structure, so it takes more time. So the city council only stepped in later to do some light moderation, but that was a spontaneous kind of interaction online. The loosely moderated group provided citizens with the tools to redefine and take control of the qualitative, interpretative, and contextualized changes that the global crisis has brought at the social and local level. So in other words, here you had a lot of worried citizens belonging to the same community, the same city, who were coming together to deliberate about a new situation about which they didn't know what the acceptable behaviors attitudes were like or were to be. So they came together, they filled the space in a few hours to try to understand, to try to get an idea of what the new rule of the social interactions of the life in the pandemic were like. And this again demonstrates that citizens strongly need to deliberate during a crisis as a way to regain control and reorganize meaning when something extraordinary happens. They need to reconstruct the invisible side of society, the collective thinking and the written rules of society. They may not know that they have this need, but as a sociologist, I can see that people have this need to reconstruct their written rules. That's what digital and social media need to be for. So people frantically search for those as soon as an emergency happens, and that reveals how important social media are for citizens. And now I want to conclude my talk. I think I still have got time, but just I think 3-4 minutes if I'm allowed them. 2 main points to finish this talk and offer a critical reflection about this theoretical and broader sort of contribution that I've been giving today. The first thing is about the biggest obstacle. The biggest obstacle that I think affects telecommunication, digital communication today, in order to actually be a good sort of set of telecommunication tools, etc., is a sociological one. It is the fact that individuals are more and more individuals. Individuals are really alone ideologically. The ideological need of individuals for a social glue, or the fact of not living in a culturally structured society as the previous ones were, is something that informationalism alone, without links to a specific community, that does not offer automatically. And by informationalism, I also mean media literacy, efforts that we may do in improving the engagement of people with the media. That does not suffice when you have social fragmentation, something materially fragmented, and social media is more likely to become a context of a polarized context, and that's more likely to trigger simplifications among digital audiences. My final point, however, is about people more specifically, because I think they are the most important subject in our talks. And Castell spoke of the networked symbolic analysts or knowledge workers that I was talking about, was mentioning at the beginning of my talk, and said that they will connect well with this fluid society, and they will work globally, and they will make the best contribution. But he also acknowledged that many other workers were still geographically stuck, and he was concerned about the implications of social polarization and exclusion from the global capitalist economy of the information underclass. And here I'm using Castells, but also Webster and Robson, just to mention the theoreticians and the scholars who inspired my talk today. And Webster and Robbins in particular were also particularly concerned about the capacity of the education system to function as a supplier of quality informational labor, because without that, they believe that society would not have been better in the future, but perhaps much worse. Here I see perhaps what could be the most important contribution by the theory of the network society to reflect on telecommunication and information society on this special day. That is the fact that this divide between symbolic analysts, knowledge workers such as ourselves perhaps, and the information underclass still exists and persists, and it is much more important than any digital divide or obstacle to or in media for citizens. It separates cosmopolitan individuals able to engage with new ideas, equipped with skills needed to defend democracies, able to change course in their life, from individuals who are stuck in their neighbors and live progressively impoverished lives, only equipped with survivalist ideologies that frame any change as threat. They live, in other words, in a sort of ideological immobility. Therefore, I firmly believe that the most important aspect to reflect on this day is about the quality of social, economic, and political life of citizens, which in turn will strengthen ideological flexibility and improve the society in which we live. So to answer the original question about social media, we live, and if they're good or bad, we live in the culturally unstructured society of the information age, but ideology is not really as fluid or networked. So ideological flexibility is not as fluid or networked as information. We can organize meanings in two ways, in a lonely way or in a collective way. And I believe that good social media are those that allow a collective and deliberative reconstruction of meaning in the postmodern age, especially when extraordinary social divides lay behind the interactive telecommunication system and during special and extraordinary long-term crises as the one in which we are living today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giuliana. That was wonderful. Our last talk is delivered by two speakers. I'll introduce them separately. Amanda Wilson from de Montfort is lecturer in psychology and a public health psychologist, is how she describes herself, using a wide repertoire of research methods to better understand marginalization, health and well-being. She says she's broadly interested in applying research to address health disparities in local, national, international and online communities. And her subject of special expertise is sexual and reproductive health. And she'll be joined by Pinky Rajput, who is Deputy Head of Services at the organisation called Victim First /Catch-22, which is a free, independent and confidential not-for-profit service supporting victims and witnesses of crime across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. And the title for their talk is "It's Not Your Fault, Tell Someone. Case studies of young women's experiences of online grooming in England." Over to the both of you.
Thank you for that introduction, Gabriel. And just to give a couple other thank yous, thank you to Miss Emily Smith, our research assistant, Dr. Rashawn Ryan, Dr. Emma Short. All three are part of the psychology and technology cluster here at DMU, who also peer reviewed the presentation today. Also, thank you to Mr. Ezra Francis, who was the children and young people caseworker during this study. Thank you to the young women. And last but not least, thank you so much to my partner joining me today, Pinky. You really did all the legwork and you made this study possible. So thank you for that. Today, we're going to talk to you about a paper that we have under review in a peer-reviewed journal called "It Is Not Your Fault, Tell Someone: Case Studies of Young Women's Experiences of Online Grooming in England." So we carried out the work clearly together, and the charity provides support to children and young people and have a specialist children and young people caseworker. So I'll just turn to Pinky real quick and give her an opportunity to share a bit more about services and some of the safeguarding they do.
Yes, so thank you, Amanda, and thank you for those very kind words in the introduction. I can't take credit because we worked with Ezra as well, who was our children and people caseworker. So as Gabriel mentioned in our introduction, Victim First is the local victim support service providing support to anyone who's been a victim or a witness of crime in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. We're one of 3 victim services across Catch 22 as our organisation. We have a real ethos around making sure everyone who enters our service has their voice listened to, and our work is to basically make sure they cope and recover from the incident. We can support them throughout that in the best way, and the safeguarding that underpins this is, we work using a trauma-informed way. So we're completely led by the individuals, but that forms our safeguarding in terms of managing their expectations, how we work with each individual who enters our service, especially with these young people who, were brave enough to say yes to wanting to have their voices heard and make a real difference on their experiences of a digital platform and how that, how they've been victims of online crime, and really wanting to make a change to other children and young people, but then professionals in the field. And we worked really collaboratively with yourself, Amanda, to make sure each stage, we had consent from them, their relevant parent guardian was involved, and they really understood exactly what was going to happen and, tailored to what they would feel comfortable with. Alongside that, our children and young people caseworker did the wraparound support to make sure, they had wellbeing calls at each stage, and that was followed throughout. So that's a quick overview, but please, everyone who is listening today, do pop any questions in the comments, because I'm sure we'll come to that as a panel at the end.
Great, thanks for that, Pinky. So we'll talk a bit more about ethical considerations that leads quite nicely after the safeguarding. So all materials were co-created, and that was really important because we did not want to re-traumatize the young people. So the interview schedule we did together, we made sure those questions weren't going to ask too much, that they were just going to stay on that surface level, but still get that detail that we need. So some of the key ethical procedures that we had in place was we made sure a caseworker was available to the young person if they wanted further support after the interview. And if they needed to during the interview, of course, we could stop and call Victim First Catch 22. They had to have a parent or a guardian who was also available. They could be in the same room, they could be in a separate room, however the young person wanted it. It's important to say no new crimes were reported, thankfully, in regards to safeguarding, that we got both consent and assent, so assent for young people, because they can't consent themselves. And these were received before we started the interviews, and participants were told, whether they participated or not, that this would not affect any support they received, both from yourself, Pinky, and from our end as DMU as well. So what does the literature try kind of say? In 11 European countries, 81% of children reported using their smartphone every day to access the internet. Within the space of a year, 25% of children aged 9 to 16 reported feeling bothered or upset by something that happened. So this could be something like the sexual messages that we'll talk about in a bit, not in detail, communicating with strangers, which also happened as well, and potentially meeting offline, data misuse, and cyberbullying. So there's quite a wide range of things that young people are susceptible of. So what was our research question? Well, we were very exploratory. We went in going, we don't necessarily know exactly how people experience crime, especially young people. We want to hear from their voices, how they experience it. We can do our textbook definition all day, but if that doesn't match up with their experience, then, we've really missed that support. So it was exploratory, it was bottom up, so it came from them themselves, like we said, and very similar to grounded theory. So it was very broad. How do young people experience online crime? So as you can see, we didn't set out to do an online grooming study. However, it just so happened that those were the interviews that came forward. So data was collected August 12th, 2020 to January 20th, 2021. This was during the COVID-19 pandemic, so everything had to be moved online, either WhatsApp for Business or Skype for Business. And this depended on the young person and their preference. We really wanted to make sure they felt safe. That was our first priority. And they felt like it was a platform that they knew how to use. So we left recruitment open until August 2021. We had one more person come forward, but they fell through, and that's absolutely okay because not everyone, like we said, was going to be able to go through all of those stages. And that's when we decided to wrap it up and to start writing up the case studies for publication. There's a quote here, I won't go into all of it, by Robert Yin, and it just kind of describes what case studies are for those of you who might not be familiar with them. It does explain that in relation to experiments. So if you're an experimental psychologist, then this might be helpful. If not, I'll explain just a little bit. So when we're looking at a case study, we consider each case study one unit. So if there's more than one case study like we have here, this is considered to multiple experiments. So under this assumption, we don't have problems generalizing from case studies. It's no different than, problems with generalizing from experiments. And it's kind of this idea that, it's not theory driven, but that we are driven theory. So we really use case studies to try to understand those wider theories, how they emerge and if they emerge. So now it's going to get a bit more text heavy on the slides, but it's really important that you see in these young women's own words what they had to say. So anytime you see some kind of quotation marks, that's an indication that that's come from the young person themselves. And I'm going to go side by side through each one of these slides. So the first case study was a 12-year-old female, and we gave her a code name of CB. The second case study was a 16-year-old female, and we gave the code name of DH. So CB, the interview was a bit shorter. Her mother was present for support upon request. However, that could be due to cognitive reasoning developing around the age of 12. So you would need a bit more parental support while that reasoning is developing. So she started to get random messages from this guy she didn't know, and he was asking for pictures of her upper area. But she had her Nana and her mom for support when it happened, so she turned directly to them. They turned to the police, but she herself felt that they weren't as much help. She did feel, though, that she got support from her family, that she got support from school, and that she got support from the victim service, which were all really important for her to feel safe. For DH, she laughed through some of the interview, mainly because we started talking about my understanding of social media. And definitely the young people have an understanding, I think, beyond most people's. So we kept joking that I was a bit of a dinosaur when it came to social media, but it really worked well because it was able to give us a bit more detail about how that social media and how it can be used both for benefit and for a negative. So she was groomed online by a man in his 30s to 40s. They had been speaking for a while, which was 2 years, and that was prior to her reporting him to the police. But at the time they began to talk, he said he was 16 to 18 years of age. So she felt supported by her boyfriend, his mother, and then once it was reported, she felt the support of, the victim service as well as the police. So going back to CB, the school contacted the guy. That's how it started to stop. However, CB said it was always playing on her mind, that she could not get back to normal. This is where the victim service really came in and provided a lot of support. Her caseworker was able to not only come to school and meet her there, but do some of the work with her there and to work with the school and with her family as well. For DH, she especially appreciated a call, even if it was just to say hello, how are you doing? What have you been up to lately? And maybe if it wasn't just, about the case. So she said, even if it's about random stuff, it was much better than not really talking to anyone. Her thoughts and feelings were that she was lucky, and she said this more than once to kind of make an emphasis because she had planned to go meet up with the man she thought was her age. So again, the fact she didn't go and do that, she felt very lucky. Looking back to CB, the best advice she had was not to feel embarrassed by the crime and that you should tell someone what is happening. So she told her mother, like we said, as soon as she could. Her mother then blocked the person from messaging her. However, one of the things that ended up happening was they got her a new phone, and the man was able to contact her on that new phone because they hadn't set up the blocking yet. So again, there was support from school and from the victim service about how to block people and how to make sure that stayed there and stay safe. For DH, the individual in question had made contact with her through someone else's Snapchat story. This is where she kind of really filled me in on how Snapchat works. And DH found out the groomer was older than 16 to 18 when she reported him to the police and he had to go to court. Her boyfriend had told his mother about the unwanted contact, and his mother had phoned the police because DH was not going to say anything. And she said the reason was because people usually don't speak out about it. So I wasn't about to say, oh, this so-and-so says happened and I need help. Going back to CB and her family, they did feel a bit defeated by the lack of police response, but they didn't want the charity to chase them. They felt like they had got the outcome they wanted, which was for the behavior to stop and for their daughter to return to some kind of normality with using the internet. And with DH, she had positive interactions with the police, saying they were really helpful, particularly the male officer. So again, doesn't need to be a female officer for it to be helpful, and I think that's one of the important things that came out. For DH, the court case was nearly over, and the individual was soon to receive a sentence. It wouldn't be longer than 2 years, and she seemed doubtful that he would receive the full time. When we talked a bit more about it, was it a long time? She said it's a long time for someone to serve, but maybe sometimes it's not enough. Again, going back to CB, she said she liked to use other platforms. This is part of her recovery process, like Instagram, but she didn't use them because she didn't feel safe using them anymore. But to end on a positive note, she was asked, well, what social media do you enjoy now? And she talked a lot about gaming, so she really liked playing games, and she knew how to now be safe with the chat function off and things like that. And for DH to have justice, she explained that, it was a bit different. She needed him to apologize to her for what he had done, acknowledge, she said, the hate he has caused her, that he acknowledges how much hurt he has caused his friends and his family, and the damage he has caused between them and DH for his own gratification, that he has a child and he is supposed to look after that child. One important thing for DH to feel she had justice, she acknowledged she couldn't happen, and I think it would be like me to get to see what he actually looks like, to put a name to the face, but I don't know if I can't do that. So just a quick read some advice that the young women had for other people to stay safe online is not to keep it in and tell people straight away, and don't talk to strangers, block them right away. For DH, the best advice she had was that it wasn't her fault. No matter what happened, it wasn't because of me. It's because of him and what his mind was like, suggesting, as mentioned, there was a high level of shame or embarrassment that came with online grooming. So she did show some resilience, or like what I call now post-traumatic growth. She was asked if she didn't mind sharing who gave her that advice, and it was the best response ever. She goes, it was kind of myself. And then like everyone else just telling me like it weren't your fault. So like it wasn't because of you. So I kind of listened to myself and other people, that it wasn't my fault, that he did what he did. As it's important again to use DH's own words, she had one last bit of advice to keep other people safe. So make sure to check names on social media, see if they're actually people and not catfish, see how old they are, and actually are educated themselves on like the warning signs and the red flags. And don't add a lot of people, or like add them back when you think, oh, I might know them, but you don't. So some of the bad advice that was given, mainly DH said that just to block him, that wasn't going to work for her. She didn't think that was helpful advice because you can mute the message, but this man created other fake accounts in order to be able to contact her. However, it's really important to know this was contrasted to the first case study. So with CB, this was actually quite effective. And this, again, could be due to their age or the specific needs that they had for safeguarding. and to talk about some of the findings. So in most literature, it's where the groomer is part of a large organization. And these studies looked at where it was one individual who's not part of an organized group as far as we know. Research is needed on how officers can prevent online grooming from occurring in the first place. This is using information that provides the ability to reflect on the online groomer's behavior. So if we use these case studies and then we got to collect other ones from all the other places online, that as a whole, these would be a good place for officers to reflect. Some of the other findings included that, the social media allows them as a groomer to contact them using multiple platforms. It could be Snapchat, WhatsApp, Facebook, all three of those, a combination of some of them. And it's so they become an all-encompassing part of this person's life. Some of them don't see a need for prolonged grooming patterns or incentives, and that was the case in this study. So there weren't any incentives given other than the time that was given. They didn't give any money, anything like that gift-wise. So it's important that we know that not all groomers act in the same way, and I think that will help us with identifying these individuals a bit easier. Research has further shown that women who are being groomed online face contact from the groomer on their mobiles while at school. Again, we saw this with CB. She was still getting contact from the individual while she was at school, which is why the school got involved to begin with. And previous research states that help from an independent professional is invaluable to the young women. And I can say this is definitely the case with this study here. So school education wasn't adequate. They didn't think that the information given was realistic, and they wanted to see case studies like this in other research and in this research used so that students could have more realistic education. Future interventions could use these case studies as an example to be able to create a more standardized curriculum across all of England for schools. And we have some final additional things to say. When ending the grooming, the women said in case studies that it mirrored previous research. They showed post-traumatic growth, and that they were informed about the main advice from this study being to not be ashamed, it's not your fault, and that they should tell an adult. With all young women grateful knowing it could have ended worse, like when the one young woman was going to meet up with the man offline. Just some limitations and conclusions to end with. So it's important to note that the literature is overrepresented with young women and that young boys rarely report this type of abuse. However, these young women were very brave, as Pinky said, and I definitely agree that if they're willing to come forward and talk about these things, then we should allow them to do that. And that was outlined in the assent form. These case studies are unique in that they provide suggestions that young people with a good social support system can still be victims of online grooming, and that the groomers were individuals, not organizations. Overall, this study suggests there is a need for an additional research to revisit predictive factors, and while both young women have survived the incidents that could have been much more harmful, they did not feel that they would get justice, and we need to understand a bit more in the future what that justice can look like. I know that your organization, Pinky, already does a lot around this and restorative justice where appropriate. And it's also important that other young people know that, yes, this might happen to you and that this isn't your fault. People can get your number who don't know you. People can get your social media that don't know you. And you know what? They may send you a message. It may be an inappropriate message. So don't bottle that in. Don't feel ashamed. Go to a trusted adult. Tell them. And that was the biggest advice from the young woman. Before we go to all of our questions, Pinky, do you just want to say a few words on how these findings have been implemented within services already?
Yes, of course. So thank you so much for covering that in really good detail. I think the main one that we've managed to implement, the theme of best practice, which already exists across our victim services and how we deliver support to each individual, is re-emphasizing that message of it really isn't your fault and not being afraid or feeling embarrassed. I think both case studies, CB and DH, really, voiced really effectively how valuable that was. And I think we can't take away or minimize that. And that really, really affects, helps someone really come forward and be brave enough to kind of actually, this is what's happened, and then, access support. So that was something that we were able to kind of, already go, that's piece of best practice, but then also, build that into when we have been raising awareness and working with partners, other agencies, when we were attending events, making sure that voice isn't lost and, these young people are being heard. That's when we've been putting things out on social media or, engaging with other, partners as well. And the other bit is around, I think DH especially spoke about how people can be targeted using, online platforms and social media in a very clever way that targets a group of friends. And, from working with these young people and, those that present for our service, we find a lot of sort of almost safeguarding tips and advice around, how to do digital use and how to effectively safeguard yourself. It's very much focused on the individual and their family support. So it's not a very holistic way of looking at it when you are trying to safeguard or trying to work with individuals, and looking at a wider network and who may be involved with them, and, is that information coming to their friends, for example, who may also benefit from that, and DH spoke at length around how Snapchat works and the intricacies, which is fantastic. But I think that's really important to be aware of. And, the key bit is adapting to that individual, because I think, the bits that didn't work for them, the bad, almost bad advice that they were given was very much different to that young piece. And then, and that is exactly what we see as a service, and which is why we're completely led by that individual. And there's still a huge amount of work to be done. I spoke to both young young persons yesterday who were delighted, in fact, already that we're championing their voice. We're at this platform to be able to talk to, other professionals or, those that are interested in this on today. And, I think what we'll be doing is going back and looking at it as an organisation, looking at, what other bits what can we lift from this, especially the advice around external partners, what the police approach. I think you addressed very nicely there. There's almost a myth and there's a challenge of a myth around, it doesn't matter the gender of the officer that's dealing with the young person. Actually, it's the approach that's being taken, and I think that's really, really good to highlight. So with one eye on the time as well. So those are the kind of findings we've been able to implement. But like I said, a huge amount of work. What we want to do is make sure that we work with these young people, both for really, really wanting to do that as well, because they've got some fresh and innovative ideas around how we can even engage with schools, and that's completely what we want to do, to make sure they're going to bring some fresh, valuable ideas. So when we are looking at how we can further this and who can benefit, I think that's the best way to go forward.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, Pinky. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you also to Giuliana and Indrani. So let's take the questions that have come in. I have them in front of me. I'm going to start reading. There's one for you, Giuliana. Giulia, what do you think the world, do you think the world has learnt that social media are not a good source of information after the spreading of fake news during the COVID pandemic and the Ukraine crisis?
Well, I think, what do I think the world has learned? I think it has learned a lot in terms of quantity. So there is a lot of awareness about the fact that fake news are bad and social media can be bad sometimes. But I don't think that the world, then we can specify who we're talking about here, but we have learned enough about the process behind that and the quality. The moment we say what the world has learned about fake news, we are implying that the problem is fake news. As I've demonstrated, even when you have quality information, you are not going to have the effect that you want in qualitative terms, because something else is missing. So this is beyond informationalism. This is about, if we want to say it in very generic terms, the situation, the dynamics at the social, economic level, how people feel, their sense of identities, and so on. So it's the work of sociologists into media. That's what the world still need to learn. If, however, institutions, local councils, or I don't know, the Council of Europe want to keep focusing on information, then at least they have to do it more sociologically. They have to be able to think of quality information, and as that information which allows to undo or push on some of the triggers, the social triggers these elements that reshape how people think of themselves and so on. And this again requires sociologists into media and communication studies.
Thank you, Giuliana. I have a question of my own, actually, for Indrani.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about digital exclusion, the digital divide. I was reading the other day Age UK's advice, and it's actually its policy report on the digital divide and how, in its opinion, quite a lot of old people are not engaging with digital technologies. I was struck by the irony that its policy is entirely digitally available only. They've printed it. You can only actually get it online. And I wanted to ask, in relation to what your work on using social media to help build community resilience, do you have any worries about the people we're leaving behind who don't use these media? Perhaps, but maybe not only, perhaps the old and those who can't afford a smartphone. What are your thoughts on that, Indrani?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And actually, we have been actually exploring these questions during the workshops that we had with the community, last week. And basically, what came up quite a few times is that one is the fear for the technology. So they just don't know where, if they are using the platform and where they're exposed to, like who is listening to them, who is watching them, and all of that. That's one thing. The second thing is that they don't know how to use it, and therefore they have to depend on someone else to help them navigate through it. And that means that they can only go onto Zoom and doing other sessions when they have got a helping hand. So those were the two things that came up, and both of them actually links to the digital divide that we are trying to address. So one is to kind of how to educate people, or particularly train up people on the digital devices, so how they can use and they can get more independent on it. And it doesn't it's not going to happen through one workshop. It needs a series of workshops. The question is, the problem is, it's a very much of a social problem, because of course, if you are teaching someone on digital devices, then you have to make sure that they have access to the digital devices, which means either they will have to buy it or they will have to borrow it. But at the moment, I think borrowing of those devices, so we went in to look for it, and the problem is that the borrowing of devices were particularly for the schools, because that was the problem at that point of time. It was the homeschooling, and therefore the devices were given out to the schools to help facilitate that learning. But there is not much that can be done for the people who actually want to learn it, and they are particularly from the older generation. So I think that's where we are also asking for business help, and we are trying to understand if there are organizations who can actually provide support to then work through that, so that we can train up. And that's one of our training that will be coming up in July, to kind of work with the community. So that's one of the thing. But when it comes to actually practicing it, because as you might know, that when you are actually on the social media platforms, you need to actually get used to the platforms, and that means that they need to own the devices. So to be honest, there is no one set of answers for this one. I think we have to actually work out what the need is, and who are the people who can, or who are the businesses who can actually support us in delivering this, because we need to remember that the crisis, well, this crisis is over, but you just don't know what crisis will come next and how we need to prepare for that.
Yeah. Thank you. That's an excellent answer. Thanks. I've got a question from our audience. I'm going to combine, excuse me, two questions for Amanda and Pinky. And it's, do you have recommendations preventing young people getting obsessed with social media? And connected to that, I want to combine that with a question on just why do young people respond to strangers? This person says, I just find it difficult to understand why they don't just ignore the messages. So the practical bit is, can you talk about recommendations for preventing obsession? But also, can you help us get a handle on why do they even answer? What's going on there? Pinky and Amanda.
I'll let you go with the recommendations first, Pinky.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose there's also a bit I can talk about on why people also may not ignore. I'll start with that one first, actually, because it's very easy to sort of almost come at it from an objective point of view and look at it. It's very easy to ignore. However, you have to really look at what's going on for each young person. What in a very holistic perspective, are they using these platforms to engage because they may not have a social network outside? I think what we saw, especially with Catch-22, with all our services, the pandemic really isolated young people. So where they would go to their peers, where they may have a social network outside, have that interaction, the development there, that was a big thing, especially with using their development, which is very easily, when the opportunity presents, you're engaging. You might go onto a forum, it could be you're online reading about something that you're very interested in, such as a hobby. Some young people interested in football, for example, don't ask me to talk about that topic because it's not going to go very well. However, they could be engaging with other people, and someone else engages that, and they form a common connection. It's not very much at everyone's forefront that, oh my God, this is a stranger, because I think what we really saw from that research, and that was emphasised, DH and even CB said there's not a lot of literature around school. There's a lot of discussions around how to stay safe if you're out and about on the streets, for example, how not to engage with others. So it's something that really you have to look at a wider angle and perspective. What's going for these young people. Everyone is different. Everyone's responses will be different, and a lot of the time, predators essentially will be preying on people who are vulnerable and trying to adapt to those social skills. And I suppose Gabriel, you mentioned they also spoke about recommendations, but there was another part of that question, just so I'll answer that correctly.
Yeah, it's just why. Well, I think you've answered a bit about why don't people just ignore. It sounds like what you're saying here, and I think we may all agree on this, that there's something really strangely addictive about this stuff, and it is because we are social creatures. We just haven't had it mediated by technology before. We just didn't mind when people just naturally form groups. It just seems a weird way to be channeling that through something you hold in your hand. But yes, the question was about recommendations, about obsession, and also understanding why young people in particular can't just ignore when it goes creepy. And I guess what I'm hearing from you is that there's a sort of slippery slope that the careful groomer sucks someone in bit by bit by preying on the interests. And I guess the odd comment, I'm interested in your top half or whatever, what does the young person do? Just filter that out and imagine that didn't happen, or not give it the weight it ought to have, because they've enjoyed the previous interaction. Is that what's going on?
Sometimes, again, case by case basis, and it really does depend on there's obviously an unmet need for that young piece, and that's being met by this external person coming in terms of recommendations. It's what we saw in the research that we Amanda's just talked through, and a little bit what in Dr. Indrani and Dr. Giuliana you touched around as society. That addiction almost comes because that's a platform, that's the new age, that's where we're working. Whether that's school, education, employment, these are all the platforms that we're so used to. All five of us here and the external guests are all using data and technology. It is very much easy to go into that rabbit hole and go, right, okay, this is becoming day-to-day life, because we know that's where society is moving towards. And that kind of forms part of the addiction, and as well as not only tapping into an unmet need for a young person, because they're getting some sort of value, some sort of benefit from it, but also that is now becoming their day-to-day norm of their existence. Amanda, I don't know whether you want to add to that.
No, they're the influencer generation. That did not exist when I was growing up as an occupation. And a lot of them see that as a potential occupation, or at least it's something they're interested in for a while. And to be an influencer, that's what you do. You have a bunch of strangers on your social media, don't you? It comes with good and bad, like we've all discussed today. But I also think there's some things that are going on in the adolescent brain that are really important to raise. This is a basic overview. It's far more complex than this. But we have things, so the prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop till around 25. And that's in charge of emotional reasoning, right? So we have high impulsivity among adolescents, which slowly drops off as you begin to age. like I mentioned, until the age of around 12, 13, you don't develop cognitive reasoning or scientific reasoning. But also what you see in adolescence is you revisit these stages of egoism, where, you know, you believe that whatever is going on with you is the most important thing. We see that time of storm and turmoil a bit with hormones changing, all of that going on. So I think it's just not as maybe black and white as why don't they just ignore them. I think there's a lot of other social factors really pushing on them, and because their brains haven't fully developed, they're not always going to make the best decisions, and that's what we're here for, to kind of guide them and hope that we can make a difference.
Yeah, I think I quite agree with that point about the brain development. It strikes me that our legal system has this bizarre idea that a person has fully formed who they are at the age of 18. The whole point of working in a university teaches you surely that they haven't finished. They are so changing, and they come out the other end at 21 or later completely different. And I think our legal system should take that into account, certainly when judging the behavior of people up to the age of 25. We've got time for one more question. I think I wanted to ask Giuliana something of my own, because I was fascinated by your touching on this prefix smart that gets put in front of things. Did I hear you right in being a little bit skeptical about the smart so-and-so?
Yeah, you heard me right. Skeptical
good.
about the smart. So the smart everything is something of, I guess, the early 2000, late teens. So the 2000 to 2010, maybe 2013, 15, 16. There is an underlying idea that if we take the city and we put more quantity of information, it will become smart, because it will allow us to do better things, which is not automatic for some of the reasons I've been saying before. And in general, I guess that if I have to summarize my main thinking, which has been kind of triggered by this invitation to come here and by listening to you, I would say that I really agree with what Amanda and Indrani have been saying. I would also add that it's not just the individual psychological, social factors like these or that, but also the sociological idea that we all are social beings. We all have needs that need to be fulfilled as member of a society. If society doesn't fulfill those needs, doesn't help anymore we remain hungry for these things. We're not even aware that that's the reason, but these needs then are filled by networks, and networks are simply artificial intelligence, algorithms, trending ideas of the day. It's a mix of things which by itself is neither good or bad, but is left to the nothing to manage all these. So there is this withdrawal that I kind of want to denounce a little bit. Who has the responsibility here? Yes, the researchers, first of all, I think to point this out, and then doing all the wonderful research that you do, the empirical research that you have been talking about.
Thank you, Giuliana. I want to draw this to a close, as we've only got a minute and a half left, and just remark that this roundtable has shown me the extraordinary vibrancy of the research being done at this university, which is both highly abstract and theoretical and informed by deep thought about what's going on, and has these practical connections moving out into the city and the world in which we live, in order to actually show that it matters what we decide about these things. And I'm very grateful to all five of you for the talks that you've given. I think it's been extraordinarily illuminating. I think I'm going to risk it. We can't put everyone else on to put their mics on. It's going to have to be just me, but I'm going to thank you on my own for your talks by saying that was just absolutely wonderful. I'm pretty sure, I'm sure there's many people online are doing the same thing, but not being heard. So let me thank you all again for your wonderful talks, and there'll be more of these roundtable discussions as the theme of living in a digital society draws across the expertise at Montfort University and partner organisations to explore what this theme really means to all of us. So thanks very much, and goodbye to everyone.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.